Something you've mentioned as well in the past, and this is a topic that I've actually discussed at length with a mentor of mine here in Australia, Sir William of Rotherham. And it's the idea of Bitcoin as pristine collateral. And I'd love you to just unpack what that means to you in light of the fact that a lot of us believe that the answer long term is not to sell your Bitcoin for fiat, but rather to leverage against it in the future.
Yeah, Bitcoin's the type of asset where if I'm in London and I own a bunch of Bitcoin, I can move it to another part of the world, generate liquidity on it without any slippage on that investment, right? Or on that capital rather. There is normally with real estate, you have slippage. You've got roofs that need doing. You've got, carpets that need replacing, or you've got morons that just don't know how to use the kitchen, right? And you need to replace the kitchen, for example, or whatever it is. With stocks, you also have slippage, right? With stocks, the majority of the slippage comes from, the risks that the company might take to devalue your investment. Then you've got obviously capital gains and taxes that allow that cause slippage across all of these investments. And of course, the smartest people don't ever sell their assets. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is one of these pure things that comes along once in a while. And if I'm in London and I want to generate finance on my Bitcoin, I can turn around and call a bank in London and say, hey, I want some financing. And they'll say, fine, we'll give you it at a 5% interest rate, for example. And they'll say, cool, I'll call you back in a second. Call New York and say, hey, I got this Bitcoin. London just offered me 5%. And they'll say, we'll give you 4.5% because we want the business. Now I call Singapore and Singapore says, oh, fuck London and New York. We'll give it to you for 3%, right? And then I call a bank somewhere else and just democratize all of this finance, and that there's no slippage on the investment, and no matter what I do, I can't harm the investment just by holding it. So that to me is just a phenomenal thing. I've never seen anything like it. Even gold, right? Because in order to move gold, let's say I want to generate financing on gold in Singapore from London. I got to move that damn gold from London to Singapore. And that's going to cost me millions of dollars to do, or depending on the amount of gold that I have, right? This is all extremely important. It's the first time that finance has ever experienced an asset. If they want to, if a Singapore bank wants to loan on $100 million New York property portfolio, they got to have, and they don't have offices there. They got to have a team on the ground. They got to do their own research. They got to need to understand the local market. They need to do so much work just to gain access to that, not including the regulatory work that's required as well. So with Bitcoin, I can see a future where people just get told, hey, put your money into Bitcoin and we'll loan against it from anywhere in the world at any time. Because as long as you can send a transaction, it's basically pristine. We can see that it's there.
Yeah, I never thought about it from a jurisdictional perspective. And, drawing on my real estate background, it'd be like the equivalent of, let's say you want to invest in a property over here in Australia and you want to get finance from a company in, Spain, some sort of bank in Spain. I mean, like, think about all the hoops they're going to have to jump through. They're going to, to register their name against the title deeds, to be able to do all of that, the due diligence, all that kind of jazz. It's think about what that process looks like for you to get finance from overseas. Whereas, yeah, to your point, I mean, literally the ability for you to actually shop around in different jurisdictions because they what I'm assuming they could do as an example is you go, all right, I want to borrow 100K, you put up your Bitcoin and you say, all right, let's talk to different banks, and then they just issue stable coins. And so literally within 10 minutes you have your 100K, or 20 minutes or whatever it might be. I think that's quite phenomenal. How much of that is contingent upon the banks necessarily understanding Bitcoin as being the scarce asset on earth? Or do you think they just don't necessarily have to care because it is capable of being liquidated 24/7 too? So they'll just over collateralize?
Yeah, they don't. It's not their job to worry about that, right? And again, I'm not saying that they don't worry about that, because I had people telling me BlackRock doesn't understand Bitcoin. I was like, are you a moron? Are you actually a stupid fucking moron telling me that BlackRock doesn't understand? This was like a couple of years ago, right?
Mm.
The CIO of BlackRock at the time, I think his name is Rick Reeder, was on CNBC in 2020 saying, we could see Bitcoin becoming gold 2.0. At that moment, right? This is when I divested all of my gold. So he said that in 2020 or something like that. And 17 days preceding that or after that, there was outflows from the GLD gold ETF. 17 days. of consistent outflows. And I was like, okay, we're done. So from that moment, I knew that BlackRock was focused on Bitcoin in some sort of way. The banks were coming at that point. I had people telling me, oh, BlackRock doesn't understand Bitcoin. I'm like, they've got enough money to hire 200 full-time nerds that are, one of them is smarter than every Twitter nerd that you know, including myself. And they're going to
Totally.
sit there and figure out what Bitcoin is for the next 3 or 4 years before they make a move on it. And that's exactly what happened. But yeah, listen, I think that they don't care at that point, right? At that point, what they care about is the stability of the asset, the volatility on the asset, and the ability to generate liquidity on it. The problem with a home is that if I take property as collateral and suddenly volatility goes downward, it's going to take me 6 months to sell that property.
Yeah.
So I can't generate liquidity on the asset. Whereas it's much better for me to use Bitcoin because if I ever need to do a call in on the loan, I can go into the market and within a few days, depending on the amount of Bitcoin it is, I can sell it and generate some liquidity on the market, right? And that's why Bitcoin will become that asset. It's not going to happen in a year, right? So this is what I'm talking about here is going to take time. Bitcoin's obviously going to be worth multi-millions of dollars in order for this to make any sense to anyone. The volatility is going to have to go down. The compound annual growth rate is going to have to go down, et cetera, et cetera. But this is what is coming for Bitcoin. It is going to be a collateralized asset. It is going through right now the process of securitization. We should have an ETF in the next week or so, right? A spot Bitcoin ETF. And this is the start of this process. Banks love Bitcoin. They will love Bitcoin because unlike real estate, unlike stocks, unlike anything else, they can generate liquidity at any time. It's a worldwide market. They don't need to worry about it. They don't because if you want, let's say you got Apple stock that you put up as collateral, and Apple does something stupid. They need someone that to purposely buy Apple stock.
Yeah.
It'd be much better if you just owned S&P 500 index funds, right? Because if you owned S&P 500 index funds, if they ever need to generate liquidity, everyone wants to buy S&P 500 index funds. And that's what it is with Bitcoin, right? That Bitcoin is like the S&P 500 index fund. It is the total market. Whatever's being built on it is irrelevant. It's like, if the internet has a problem, or let's say an internet company has a problem, right? Like Apple, people still want to buy the internet because they still see a future on the internet. That's what Bitcoin is becoming. It is the underlying asset. And yeah, banks don't care. All they want to do is generate liquidity as fast as possible on any loan they make.
Yeah, and as you described in that, I'm starting to think, okay, well, you've got the banks, but then you'll get these sort of neo banks, and then you'll get other types of sort of institutions that will pop up, and each will have different types of offerings. I already know of something that's sort of in the works here where you sort of can hand over your Bitcoin, obviously not your keys, not your coins, but they'll say, look, it's here, it's on chain, it's not going to move, etc. And you need to borrow X number of dollars for a period of 4 years because we know that Bitcoin's annualized return is such that the lowest return you've enjoyed over any 4-year period is over 100%. So we feel comfortable loaning you this much money based on the Bitcoin you've given us. And then we'll obviously just charge an interest rate for this period. And at the end of the 4 years, we'll deduct all the interest, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very
Or you just
excited.
refi. Or you just
Yes.
refi.
Yes, exactly. And I think I've always, when I heard Saylor first describe that, and it must have been in 2020 or 21, how he spoke about how the richest families on earth, they're not sitting there selling their real estate. The
Yeah.
people who bought Manhattan real estate. And I actually had the privilege of working with quite a few of these old families when I was in real estate technology. And this is just generation after generation who have owned properties in the heart of Manhattan. Manhattan's not going anywhere. And there's no sense in paying that down. And whenever every year it gets sort of repriced, they can just draw down, and it's just tax efficient and they never need to sell. So I guess that's how, I would look at Bitcoin as pristine collateral.